All right, let's jump right into this explainer because we're starting with a really fascinating paradox. What if I told you that the absolute greatest writer in human history, literally the guy who invented over 1,700 words that you and I still use every single day, left behind almost zero record of his actual personal life? I mean, we don't even have a definitive record of exactly how he spelled his own name. Crazy, right? Well, welcome to the immortal enigma of William Shakespeare.
So this brings up the ultimate historical puzzle. Who was the real William Shakespeare? And why on earth, over 400 years later, are people still fiercely debating his life? Today, we're going to trace the incredible journey of the man behind these legendary plays. We'll dig into the missing pieces of his story, his absolute meteoric rise, his immortal legacy, and figure out exactly why this massive 4-century-old mystery actually still matters to us today.
Section 1. The Boy from Stratford. Let's talk about his humble beginnings.
Okay, so picture this. April 1564. Way before he was this global legend, Shakespeare was born in a quiet little English town called Stratford-upon-Avon. Now, we don't know his exact birthday, but historical records do show he was baptized on April 26th. He was the son of John, who was a glove maker and local businessman, and Mary Arden, who came from a pretty well-respected farming family. Growing up, young William went through a totally strict grammar school education. We're talking long, grueling hours learning Latin, literature, and all those classic stories. But things moved surprisingly fast for him. At just 18 years old, he marries Anne Hathaway, who was 26. And honestly, this was actually kind of a scandal back then. Historians are pretty sure it was essentially a shotgun wedding. They even needed a special rushed marriage license because Anne was already pregnant with their first daughter, Susanna. And then soon after that, they welcomed twins, Hamlet and Judith. So, by all outward appearances, he was just settling right into this completely ordinary, quiet family life.
Which brings us to Section 2, The Void, also known as the Lost Years. So right between the late 1580s and the early 1590s, we hit a total, massive blank space in the history books. We literally call these the Lost Years. There are absolutely zero historical records telling us where Shakespeare went or what he was even doing during this incredibly crucial window of his life. Instead, we're left with these fascinating but totally unproven theories. Some folks think he just worked as a humble school teacher out in the countryside. Others are convinced he spent those years traveling all over England, kind of soaking up all those diverse experiences that would end up filling his plays later on. Oh, and then there's the juicy local gossip. Some say he actually had to flee Stratford in the dead of night. Why? Because he supposedly got caught poaching deer from the estate of a really powerful local nobleman named Sir Thomas Lucy. But the truth? Honestly, nobody really knows. It is absolutely mind-blowing to think that the guy who becomes the world's most famous author just vanished without a trace for almost 7 years. All right, Section 3, the explosion of genius, and his dramatic arrival in London.
When Shakespeare suddenly pops back onto the radar in London, the city was electric. Theaters were going through this massive, unprecedented boom in popularity. He actually started out just working as an actor, but he pretty quickly shifted into writing, and he started churning out plays with an almost terrifying range. Think about it. He gave us Romeo and Juliet, right? Diving straight into that heartbreaking, tragic love. But then he spins around and writes Hamlet, dealing with complex revenge and super dark inner conflict. And then Macbeth, this chilling, psychological deep dive into power and dangerous ambition. But what made him so radically different from every other writer out there wasn't just his massive vocabulary. It was his unparalleled ability to make a story feel wildly alive and make the characters feel so entirely, wonderfully real.
Because here is the secret. Human emotions never really change. That right there is the absolute core of his genius. Shakespeare wasn't out there just writing cheap, disposable entertainment. He was deeply studying people. He was meticulously observing our jealousies, our fears, our betrayals, and our dreams. Think about it. If you've ever binge-watched a modern show about dramatic corporate betrayal like Succession, or maybe a sweeping teen romance, or even a story about a young prince trying to avenge his dad, like The Lion King, you are literally watching Shakespeare's observations of the human condition in action. He just understood human psychology so perfectly that audiences sitting in a cinema right now relate to his characters just as intensely as those crowds did over 4 centuries ago. It's wild.
Naturally, all that undeniable talent led to a really rapid rise. But he didn't just stop at being a successful playwright. The guy was an incredibly savvy businessman too. He became a part owner of this hugely famous theater company called the Lord Chamberlain's Men, and there's this amazing historical anecdote about just how hardcore these guys were. At one point, facing an expiring land lease, his theater troupe literally dismantled their entire theater in the dead of winter, carried the massive wooden timbers all the way across the completely frozen River Thames under the cover of night, and used them to build the legendary Globe Theater. Talk about dedication. As his wealth and respect completely skyrocketed, his company eventually evolved into the prestigious Kingsman. So now, his plays aren't just being performed for these massive roaring public crowds, they're being performed for the King of England himself. Moving to Section 4, The Lingering Doubts, and the Mystery of the Missing Records.
Now, here is the ultimate paradox. Despite this massive fame, all the wealth, and his towering status in London, we have almost zero personal records of the man himself. We have no interviews, obviously, no direct personal diaries, and very, very few surviving personal letters that actually give us a glimpse into his mind. And because of this total silence regarding his personal thoughts, this massive historical investigation was born. Now, the mainstream historical view, what most experts agree on, is that the boy from Stratford, William Shakespeare, independently wrote all these masterpieces, plain and simple. But those missing records, they've absolutely fueled some intense secret writer theories. The skeptics argue that a humble glovemaker's son with just a basic grammar school education couldn't possibly know so much about royal courts, international law, or foreign lands. So they theorize that highly educated aristocrats, like Francis Bacon or the Earl of Oxford, were the real authors, just using Shakespeare's name as a convenient shield to protect their own reputations. Now, to be clear, most historians firmly reject these alternate theories. But still, you gotta admit, it's endlessly fascinating that this debate remains such a fiery fixture of his story today.
Finally, Section 5, An Immortal Legacy, the final chapter.
So, as he grew older, this wildly successful playwright decided to leave the crowded, bustling streets of London and head back home. He wanted to spend his later years with his family back in Stratford-upon-Avon. And it was there, in the year 1616, that William Shakespeare passed away. He was just 52 years old. Interestingly enough, even in death, the guy left us with one last puzzle. In his famously bizarre final will and testament, he left his wife Anne his, quote, second best bed. Now, historians today still passionately argue about this. Was it a petty final insult, or was it actually this deeply romantic gesture referencing their actual marital bed where their children were born? We really don't know for sure. But the absolute most important thing here is that his physical death in 1616 did not end his story. Not even close. It was really just the beginning of something much, much larger. Because look at us, over 400 years later, and his cultural footprint is completely unmatched. His legacy has literally made him immortal. I mean, his plays are continually performed on stages all around the entire globe. His exact words are analyzed and studied by students in classrooms everywhere. Those timeless stories, they are constantly being adapted into massive Hollywood blockbusters. He has completely, seamlessly crossed borders, cultures, and generations, and his works have been translated into every single major living language on Earth. Honestly, very, very few human beings in the entire span of recorded history have ever left behind a cultural impact quite this profound and powerful.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with that same hanging, provocative question we started with. Who was the real William Shakespeare? This ordinary boy from a small town undeniably became a global legend. But when you look at the lost years, the total lack of personal letters, and the fiery historical debates that are still going on, maybe we'll never fully know the flesh and blood man behind those famous words. But honestly, maybe that's okay. Maybe that enduring mystery is exactly what keeps the absolute magic of his stories so wonderfully alive today.